Hello and welcome back to our farmhouse on our little country farm. Today we are using up our farm fresh dairy with 2 different types of cheese, preparing the porch with plants and hummingbird feeders for spring, and I even have some new little lives to share. Come on in, y'all. We have so much raw goat's milk coming into this little country kitchen of ours. This is probably a week's worth of milk here, and I am getting ready to skim it so that I can use the actual milk to make cheese and save the cream for butter or ice cream or whatever we decide to use it for. With goat's milk, it's naturally homogenized, but if you let it sit in the fridge for a few days, that cream will still separate. You just probably don't get as much as you would off of cow's milk without a cream separator. So we are taking our milk here. I'm adding it to a pot, starting to heat it up. We're going to make some mozzarella cheese. For mozzarella, you start heating up your milk in a pot, about a gallon. And then you prepare 2 bowls. One has a 1/4 cup of water mixed with a 1.5 teaspoons of citric acid, and one has a 1/4 cup of water mixed with, I think it's a 1/4 teaspoon of animal rennet. And then while your milk's heating up, you just add the citric acid mix into the milk, and you want to lightly stir this. You don't want to do any kind of quick movements or get the milk too stirred up. You just want to make sure that citric acid is evenly distributed throughout your milk. You heat that up to 100 degrees. I just use a thermometer to take the temperature. You take it off the heat, and then you add in your animal rennet, and you very, very carefully mix this in so that it reaches the bottom, but you're not agitating that milk too much. And you cover it with a lid and let it sit for 10 minutes or until you get a very clean break in the curds. Take your knife, make a grid pattern in the curds, making sure you're getting all the way to the bottom. Once you get that, you just gather up all your curds and you get them all together, smushed together into a ball, and you're going to want to keep heating the whey. Stick your ball of mozzarella cheese back into it, and you want this cheese to get pretty hot. That's what's going to help you stretch it. So once it's hot enough, you just start stretching it, and as it cools, dip it back in that whey. Let your cheese sit in it until it gets pretty hot, almost too hot to handle. You'll have to use a slotted spoon to get the cheese out of the whey. But this will kind of heat it enough that you can stretch it, and you just do this over and over until the cheese is nice and smooth and can stretch pretty far. You want to make sure as you stretch it there's no tearing. So you continue to do this until there is no tearing in the cheese, and then add your salt, give it another good fold, put it back in the whey for storage. I've been making a lot of cheese. We've been making a lot of mozzarella. This is the only one that I've really done besides this next one I'm going to talk about. These 2 cheeses are the only ones we've really made, but I've been making them very regularly, and I'm really enjoying it. What I enjoy more is that there is no waste. So first I made the mozzarella, and then I'm moving on to ricotta. So all I did for this ricotta cheese is I put all of the whey that came from the mozzarella back on the stove immediately and started heating it to 190 degrees. Once it gets to 190 degrees, I turn off the heat and pour it over a flour sack towel or a cheesecloth and strain off all of the whey from basically like the leftover curds in the pot, and you end up with ricotta cheese. A I've talked many times about how the porch is one of our favorite places to be anytime the weather's nice enough to be out there. And so one way that we keep the porch this way is keeping it cleaned off the best we can, and I like to decorate. So for spring, I wanted to bring in some new plants and some that will stretch through summer. I wanted ferns for sure, I knew, and so I grabbed a few ferns for my big crocks. Fun story, the bigger crock, it came from my grandma. My mom grew up on a farm, and they actually used to make pickles and sauerkraut and things like that in these big crocks. And so they aren't just something that I picked up at the antique shop, which nothing wrong with that. A lot of my stuff is. But these actually have generational family history behind them, and I think that is so neat. I can't actually use them for any kind of food now, one, because I've planted in them, but they're cracked, so I can't use them for anything other than this and decor, so they stay on my porch, and they're very heavy. I also picked up some zinnias and some herbs to put in these pots with hopes that I can just have a little touch of the garden right here on the front porch where we spend a lot of time. And so in this terracotta pot, I am planting a little herb garden. We have our big garden, but I wanted something on the porch that is close to the house where I can just run out and grab. So I have basil, thyme, parsley, and dill here. Those are some that I use the most. And I also, on the other side, you'll see, picked up a giant rosemary plant. It had to have its own pot because it was far too big for this little herb garden pot. I planted some zinnias in one of my little yellow pots there just for a touch of color and that classic country flower. And then I also had some petunias that my daughter wanted, and I don't know how well these will last out here, but since this, they have actually really filled out and kind of flowed over the side of this pot. I love to decorate our front porch since we're out here so much, but I also like to keep it simple because we are generally not the tidiest people, and I know that sounds terrible to admit to. We are not. Stuff can easily accumulate, especially here on this porch because we are in and out. We do keep a stroller and a little wagon out here for the kids for when we go do our morning milking and other farm chores that we do. And so I would like to keep it very simple so that we can come enjoy it, but it's also clean since clutter tends to accumulate. Every year the hummingbirds come back. I watch for them so that I can put out our hummingbird feed. I pulled out my new hummingbird feeders a little while back, and I have been just trying to keep it full, but we have so many hummingbirds that they just suck it dry almost immediately. So for this hummingbird feed, I always do a cup of water to a quarter cup of sugar, heat it until it's dissolved and let it cool. And then I'm putting it in my little antique glass bottle looking feeders this year. Now for the new life. In the last video, I showed getting our incubator up and running and trying to hatch our first eggs here on our farm from our flock. And it happened. It actually happened very quickly. We started having cracks externally on the eggs, just small ones on most of the eggs on day 16 or 15. On day 15, and then by day 16, we had one starting to hatch. So here, this little chick is unzipping itself and hatching, and I got it all on camera. Is that not the most exciting and sweet thing? So I learned a few things on our first time. One, this is way easier than I expected it to be. It's also a lot messier than I expected it to be. And so cleaning the incubator is kind of a pain. But having these chicks straight from our own flock was very exciting without having to have a broody hen, because ours usually go broody for maybe a few days and then they end up eating the eggs after they sit on them, and it's very annoying. And so this was a way to kind of control that a little bit more. We borrowed this from a friend, so I'm very thankful that she let us borrow this incubator, and we have since purchased one so that we can do another round and maybe even get into hatching some goose and duck eggs that we can find locally. I am hoping for that, but we will see. This sweet little chick was the very first chick hatched on our farm, and we ended up with 19 out of the 22 eggs actually hatched. I'm so glad that you joined me on this week of cheese making and hatching eggs, and I cannot wait to see you until next week. Thanks for stopping by.